The best cards are hard to find mint, and PSA 10s can get expensive really fast. Today we find out if it makes sense to invest in lower grade cards. I'm Kakashi with Kanto Capital. The reality of Pokemon today is that finding mint cards just isn't as easy as it used to be. And PSA 9s and 10s can get expensive really fast. And I received this great question the other day, and that's if there's a card that you like or that you're trying to collect, but all the better conditioned cards are out of your price range, does it make sense to buy a beat up card or a lower grade card? And this question was actually about a certain type of card, but I really thought it just applied to all cards. And so here we are today. I thought this was a really reasonable question to ask because prices on cards lately have just gotten unobtainable for the average collector. And not everyone needs or wants a PSA 10 card for some extremely ridiculous price. But with so much focus on condition and grading, I understand that it's really easy to get caught up in the concept of trying to find a mint card. And of course, most of us would prefer to have a mint or a really nice condition card. But does buying lower grade cards actually make sense? If you're a collector, of course, only you can answer that question for yourself and what makes you happy. But if you're an investor or maybe you're a collector who is concerned about the value of your collection in the future, then what we want to do is we want to look at the facts and see if investing into lower condition cards actually makes any sense. So what I did is I pulled the data of a few different cards to see if we can actually get some reasonable price appreciation in lower grades or lower condition cards. So a few really important things to note about the information in this video. Unfortunately, these charts are not the greatest. So I'm going to be working with less than ideal conditions or data here, but we're going to work with what we have. I looked at data stretching back from the end of 2018-ish, beginning of 2019-ish to now. So it's about 2 years of action. And this helps us somewhat capture the beginning of this bull market that we're in now. Also, I have limited data because it's not really possible to pull data on ungraded cards by condition. So I just have to go with PSA cards that actually have enough volume. For example, because you can go on eBay and you'll have 10 different listings saying near mint, and there'll be some that are in terrible condition. And of course, you have some cards that are actually genuinely near mint. So ungraded cards are just really impossible to gather this data. I also had to exclude some PSA 10s because there's just so few that hit the market depending on that type of card. And even with the cards that I did choose, you'll see that there's some limitations that come into play. So make sure you like and subscribe for the time and effort it took me to really put all this together into one cohesive unit. So let's look at the numbers. First, let's look at the King, the first edition base set Charizard. With all the eyes on the hobby right now, it just makes sense to look at the most important or one of the most iconic cards in the hobby. So if we look and start at the PSA 7, it started at around $1,800 a couple years ago, and we're now up to approximately $12,400. So it's up about 689%. Really nice increase. If we go down to the PSA 6, it started at $1,200 approximately, and now we're right now sitting around $8,000. So that's a 667% increase. If we go to the PSA 5, we started at $1,050 and now we're up to $7,000, both approximate numbers again, and we're looking at an increase of about 667%. Now if we compare this to a higher grade like a PSA 9, we saw from that same time period, it started at $6,000 and went up to $39,000. It's about a 650% increase. So keep in mind, again, this is with extremely limited data. So these numbers would probably look a little bit different if there was actually more volume to look at. So consider these numbers really rough estimates, but overall the gains on all of these cards is really nice, and it's nice to see that even at the lower grades you can still see some really nice price appreciation. Now if we jump over and look at the base set Unlimited Charizard in similar grades, we're going to once again notice a fairly similar thing happening here. If we look again at PSA 7s during this time period, we'll see they started at $60 up to about $600. It's a 1,000% increase. PSA 6s, they started at $50 up to $450. That's about a 900% move. And the PSA 5 went from $50 to $350. That's up 700%. If we look at the PSA 9s in comparison, a much higher grade, it went from about $200 to $1,500. That's a 750% move. Once again, the numbers here are a little skewed, and I'd imagine that it's partially because we're in the middle of this huge retrace right now and high volatility, which is going to make these numbers a little bit harder to judge under, I guess, compared to normal conditions. But that's why we're going to look at multiple cards to get a bigger and better picture. Let's jump to something a little more recent. Obviously, we just looked at some vintage base set cards. So let's look at something more modern, and let's take a look at the Japanese Scream Pikachu promo card. So this data starts in early 2019, and this is because the first wave of PSA cards starts coming back and hitting the market. If we look at this data, we're actually going to see a very different pattern, but overall it's still a really desirable result. So key point, I did have to start at the higher grades in this particular case because the card is so modern, and so you're not really going to see, PSA 5s and 6s, or even if you do, there's just so few of them, you can't really pull any data. So we're going to start a little bit higher, and if we look at the PSA 9s, they started at $75, they're now worth about $600, and that's up about 800%. The PSA 8s, we go from $60 to $505, and that's 842% up. And the PSA 7 goes from $35 to $380. That's 1,086%. And what's really interesting here is how the results are a little skewed, and actually we see higher returns as the grades start to go down. And I think this, at least in my opinion, I think this illustrates more how maybe the right timing can really produce favorable results rather than proving that lower grades are more profitable. For example, if we look at the PSA 10 version of this card, we see that it grew from about $130 up to $1,400. That's about a 1,077% move, which breaks this pattern overall for this particular card. Keep in mind, again, this is a very modern card. It was just released in 2018, so I would imagine that over time, these numbers should start to smooth out as price history starts to flush out. And one more card I wanted to look at was something that was more regular release, very modern, and a lower value. And so keep in mind, because this is a lower value card, basically there really is no data available. So what I did was actually pulled some information that I personally had. And what I was looking at was the Generations Full Art Pikachu card from the Radiant collections. I'll put a picture up so you can see it. But I know that this card this year was very easily purchased in near mint condition for about $6 to $7 each. And again, that was earlier this year. I don't have the exact date, but I did have this recorded. And now they're selling for about $20 to $25 each in the exact same condition. So we're seeing somewhere between a 300 to 400% return depending on the values that you're looking at. Of course, we have to factor in this is in the middle of an extremely historic bull run, so don't expect 300% returns every year. But what's nice about this is I did happen to have these numbers documented already. And so even though there isn't really any PSA sales data or not significant data, we can at least reflect on the data that I do have. And we're still seeing really positive results as far as a not perfect PSA 9, PSA 10 condition cards. And we're still seeing the values actually move up on, again, near mint condition cards, which I'd say is somewhere around PSA 7 on average condition. So what's really exciting is that the data actually shows that buying lesser condition cards can work. And my personal data also reflects this based on some of my own purchases. Now, this list, keep in mind, is in no way comprehensive. This is a very small sample size, but it does show that lower condition cards can absolutely move up in price, whether we're looking at vintage cards, limited promo cards, or even modern cards. And best of all, after looking at this, again, very limited data, it appears that the rate of returns are actually very good and very competitive, even with the higher quality grades. However, of course, its effectiveness is going to vary a lot depending on several factors, and there's a few things that I really wanted to point out that I think will be very important to consider. The first thing you really need to think about is the value of the card. So it's much easier for lower condition cards to actually go up in price if the mint cards have a high price tag. This makes the other cards in lower condition more in demand, and that makes those prices go up because it's a cheaper alternative. And so if a mint card goes for, let's say, $1,000, but the average person is maybe not willing to pay that price, then a $100 or a $200 price point, it just sounds much more reasonable for something that's maybe in not perfect condition. Another important thing to consider is demand. Even if a high grade card is somewhat expensive, there still needs to be enough demand for that card. Otherwise, the lower grade cards still might not see much of a value increase. And this is because, for example, if the demand is only high enough for the highest grades, the highest grade cards, and then there's a large drop off in demand from that point, it could still lead to just lower grades not really appreciating very much. So, for example, if there are 10 PSA 10 cards and only 10 people want them, then there's still not much demand for the lower grades once the PSA 10s have all sold out. The next thing to consider is condition. I know it's basically the entire topic of this video, but what's really important here is actually the separation of grades. If all prices were equal, of course you'd pick the best condition card first. And then once those are gone, then you'd get the, let's say, near mint condition cards. And then if those are gone, then you'd go down, so forth and so forth. And so the specific condition of your card that you're investing in can matter a huge amount if you're investing into damaged, or I should say less than near mint cards, because the demand will start at the higher end first, or the better condition cards first. Unfortunately, again, I have very limited data available, but I'd assume these results would change if I was able to actually separate ungraded cards by condition, but unfortunately this is impossible. When it comes to investing in lower grade cards, you also need to realize that even if you buy the right cards, if you make the correct decision, expect the price increase to be delayed. Expect the prices of the better condition cards to go up in value first before yours do. And that could mean that your cards that you buy might not increase in value until all the best cards start to command maybe really extreme prices. And it's possible that this might even take a couple of market cycles in order to actually see major growth. Supply is another big factor. If we look at cards like the Ancient Mew, which has a ridiculously high supply, you can still buy them very easily for $15 or less or cheaper in played or decent condition. That's because there's just such a big supply of Ancient Mew cards out there. So in this case, it would be really hard to see any price increase on poor condition Ancient Mews because it's just so easy to find decent quality copies. So even if you look on the opposite side of cards that are maybe more rare, lower condition cards, they can actually go up in price regardless of condition, just for the simple fact that there's so few of them if we look at a very rare exclusive card. And so a lot of people point to trophy cards as a prime example, but you could also say very similar for just harder to find chase cards. So the phrase rising tides lifts all boats fits really appropriately here. What usually happens is a higher grade card is going to go up in value first because it's only natural that if the price is the same, we're going to pick the best condition card. So as those cards start to disappear from the market or maybe go up in price, this brings more value and demand for the lower grades, and it pretty much just continues down until the market demand is satisfied. So buying damaged cards or less than perfect condition cards it absolutely should have more risk because you expose yourself to more competition and supply. And when I say that, it's because it's just a lot easier to find cards in lower grades, and the fact that the majority of Pokemon cards, they're not really rare in terms of pure numbers. And so what separates them is a lot of times condition and just market demand. And so by going into positions with lower grade cards, you are in effect investing in cards with a larger supply. So knowing this, it's very advisable that you're extremely confident in your decision to invest in a lower condition card. And that could be because maybe you get at the right price, maybe it was a really good deal, or you just enter your position at just the right time. But if you think a card is a strong investment and a really good opportunity, the data does show that the profits are there, even if it's not in the greatest condition. And this seems to apply to pretty much any card or any era, which is really nice, whether it's vintage base set cards, limited promo cards, or modern chase cards. And we're looking at really big returns up to, or I should say, 600% returns and up in all of our sample data, which is just insane, especially when you consider the timeline of those moves. But like any investment, just due to all of the things that I mentioned earlier, you'll want to be very selective and confident with your choices if you decide to do that. So even I have cards that have triple in value or more in price despite not really being in the best or perfect condition. And so I can speak from personal experience as well that this works or can work, but I just wanted to use market data rather than my own personal viewpoint. And so that way we have some actual factual information to go off of. And it's really nice to see the real numbers and have the real data that shows investing in lower grades can actually produce really great returns. So just remember again that this data was very limited, but what we did find was very encouraging. And from an investment standpoint, lower grades appear to actually be a pretty viable option with really competitive returns. So with all of that said, if collecting is your number one goal, don't let the value get in the way of your enjoyment of the hobby. If you'd enjoy a lower condition card in your collection and you can afford that, then do what's going to make you happy. But I hope you found this video informative. Liking this video and subscribing would be really awesome. It's an easy way for you to help support this channel and the effort that went into this. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Kakashi with Kanto Capital. Have a great day, and I'll see you in the next video.